Welcome to today's webinar. The topic for today is decoding new alternative power backup regulations in California to attain compliance. My name is Dustin Teske. I'm a senior marketer at Direct Supply, and I'm very excited to be here today talking to you about this new regulatory change going into effect soon. I'll be hosting our presentation today. As a reminder, this is intended to provide general information, but it is not legal advice. Please also be aware as you read this slide that we are recording this webinar to be shared for future use as well. We've got a great group of experts that's joining me on the stage from across the skilled nursing and alternative power industry. These experts have the intent of elevating our focus on how to comply with the amendments to the Health Safety Code 141822 as mandated in the new Assembly Bill 2511. We'll first be joined by Jamie Schnick with the Department of Healthcare Access and Information. As an electrical engineer by trade, Jamie has several years with HCAI, formerly known as OSHPD, and has spearheaded the effort to develop PIN 74, which was codified into Bill late 2022. Also hailing from California, Jason Belden serves as the Director of Emergency Preparedness for CAF, the California Association of Healthcare Facilities. As the primary advocacy organization in California, his team assists with tools, templates, training programs designed to increase compliance and reduce risk for California SNFs like yours. Accompanying me from Direct Supply tells is Brody Coates. Brody helps senior living communities nationwide identify and qualify solutions ranging from alternative power to fire safety to life safety code. Over the last 9 months that this bill has been enacted, Brody has provided free 30-minute consultations to hundreds of facilities, answering questions from California SNFs looking to interpret AB 2511 into action. And last but certainly not least, we have the pleasure of being joined by John Sharpe, a 30-year veteran in the alternative power industry. John brings a unique mix of technical background and senior living expertise and experience, having spent time first with Caterpillar and now with Generac, as well as supporting senior living facilities responding to similar legislation in Florida back in 2017. These resources are available today via the website noted on screen now as well. Before we jump too far into it, I do want to clarify a few things. So first and foremost, 3 questions for you. What is the SNF alternate source of power assessment? What is the assessment looking for, and when is it due?
Yes. So we developed this SNF alternate source assessment form to allow facilities to identify resources on site. Specifically, it asks about heating and cooling equipment, emergency power, fuel source for emergency power, and it asks about life-saving equipment and oxygen generating devices. Essentially, we've developed the assessment form to allow the facilities to identify their existing conditions. It would result in either a compliant facility with the new requirements of the law or a non-compliant facility. And essentially, the due date, really, the requirement as the law is written is for facilities to be in compliance, to have alternate sources of power on site to back up temperature control equipment, oxygen generating devices, and life-saving equipment by January 1st of 2024.
So in a sense, it sounds like as HSC 1418-20.22 is the law of the backup alternative sources of power, your assessment seems to be the way that you can communicate on existing situations, and then you'll be able to dictate as you review those whether they're in compliance or whether there's deficiencies against compliance that they need to resolve. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Essentially, this is the first step to becoming compliant at your facility, and it allows you to identify your existing conditions and to get our read on agreement on that.
Got it. And I know I'm kind of hammering it home hard, but just to be super clear, the most important thing that a SNF can do today is to submit their SNF alternative source of power assessment as soon as possible.
Yes, one thing I wanted to that I didn't mention, the assessment is written kind of twofold. Number one is the documentation of the existing conditions, but we also allow you to identify remediation plans and to include that the assessment, of which we'll evaluate and provide feedback. So in essence, we're allowing you to declare what you plan to do to bring the facility into compliance and get our read on it before you start design and before you start construction to bring your facility into compliance with the new law.
Yeah, I love that. Seems really straightforward. Two things I hear, I just want to reiterate back. We want to work on getting our assessments in. That's going to dictate to HCAI what we believe our existing conditions are and what we believe our level of compliance is. HCAI is going to be able to comment on or provide feedback against that level of compliance. And if the facility or HCAI determines that you're non-compliant, it also sounds like there's going to be some comments around areas of deficiency. And if the building's prepared to do so, they can prepare and send in that proposed remediation that dictates their plan to receive compliance. Is that correct?
Yes. And that would
Perfect.
just need to be a BOD level a plan for remediation.
Perfect. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. Before we jumped onto the webinar today, you were actually explaining to us a little bit more on the background of this event overall, and specifically why Gavin Newsom signed Assembly Bill 2511 now.
In California, we've had a number of PSPS events. Essentially, because of the wildfires and because of the source of the wildfires, the public utility companies have put these public safety power shutoffs that to shut off the power to areas when the probability of fire is high to make sure that those fires aren't started by the distribution equipment. And so we're seeing more power outages. And this bill is going to address that and also address natural disasters. Obviously, in California, our biggest risk is seismic activity. And this will allow that the facility will have resources on site to continue to maintain safe temperatures, oxygen generating devices, and life saving equipment in the event of a power outage.
This makes a lot of sense to me now. The more that we talk about it, the more that I think about it. If you think back to, again, what we saw in Florida in 2017, Louisiana a few years ago, those were natural disasters that led to unfortunate, unnecessary loss of life. And in this instance, it seems like, again, really some emphasis around the cooling systems because of the variability in the high temperatures. Certainly, as we lose power in any incidents, whether it's natural or whether it's a necessary shutdown, we want to protect. Help me understand the focus of the assessment again and why it's important to get started on that now.
Sure. As I said, our job is to assist the SNF owners across the state to come into compliance, and so we put together a plan that essentially has multiple steps. The first step is to identify the deficiencies, and so you'll see on the form it asks about your heating equipment, your cooling equipment, your emergency power source, and it allows you to fill that out simply. This could be done by a professional engineer. It could be done by facilities people. We've tried to make it as simple as possible, and it will give a result of which, once we review it, will result the facility as either in compliance or not in compliance. And I said this before, but really the important thing that we're trying to offer here, the point we're trying to make is that um, you're going to be on record with us in agreement of areas of deficiency. And then you can also propose a remediation plan, and you'll be on record officially as far as how we see that remediation plan, whether we agree or whether we need to give you some input of how that plan could be made, um, could be modified to bring your facility into compliance with the new law.
So if a facility fills out the assessment and it looks like they have the ability to cover all of the new things and the existing as well, right? So they've got their existing life safety code, their emergency preparedness backed up today. They're also able to cover their life saving devices, their oxygen generating devices, and the HVAC systems to maintain temperatures. But they're unable to do it because of the 96 hours. Today they're able to get to a minimum of 6, but they're unable to get to the 96 hours. What can they do at that point?
Yeah, great question. So we have seen a number of those assessments come in where the owners did take that into account, the requirements of keeping a safe environment for the tenants. So the generator sufficiently sized, the wiring is connected, the cooling equipment to emergency, and there are plenty of red plug receptacles throughout the facility. In this case, if the only deficiency is the fuel, then the owner has the option of working with a third party to have an agreement in place for fuel delivery to fill the gap to get them from the storage that they have on site to 96 hours.
Perfect. So let's say the inverse is true. They're able to carry and cover for 96 hours, but they're not able to cover the new HVAC load or the life-saving devices or the oxygen generating, any of the three. What happens in those instances?
Well, in those instances, they're going to need to modify their system. If they don't have a generator of sufficient size, they're going to need to either upgrade that generator or find other resources that they can locate on site to provide an alternate source of power for the HVAC systems.
Got it. Perfect. So let's say they're able to cover both. They are able to cover all of the new loads, the existing loads, and meet the 96 hours. What happens in this instance?
Oh, we in that case, the assessment will come back as compliant. We'll status the facility as compliant, and a letter will be sent to the owner for it to keep on file that shows that their facility is in compliance with the new requirements of the law.
After submitting your assessment, there's a pop-up or there's a notification, or in some way it starts to say, you may be in compliance. Then it sounds like HCAI performs its review. Is there any other steps before the letter comes out, or is it just the letter goes next?
Yeah, really good point. So where the HCAI is put together the code, the requirements, and we'll be reviewing for code compliance. Once we've determined that the facility it meets all the requirements of the law, we'll forward that to CDPH, and then CDPH will take a final look at it. If they concur, that's when the letter would be sent out. If they have any comments, that would be included in a letter back to the customer to say, here are some challenges that you're going to still need to deal with.
And CDPH, just for those that may not be aware, people from Milwaukee like myself, California Department of Public
Health,
Health, right?
public
That's
health.
right. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Does really feel like it's knocking out two birds because not only is it allowing you, like you said, to determine and to state your current existing system and your perception of compliance with it, but if you are non-compliant again, and you noted this a few times, I just want to spend a few minutes on it here. You do have the ability to submit a proposed remediation in BOD. So in that regard, what would be the value? What sort of feedback can a facility receive when they submit with a BOD level solution or a proposed remediation?
We'll evaluate the proposed solution and we'll provide feedback. In some cases, we see clients saying, I'm going to back up my entire facility. Therefore, I'll get rid of my old generator and I'll be code compliant. And the reality is that is a great start, but it's not fully code compliant because there is requirements for emergency power systems, redundant feeders, transfer switches, and so we'll provide that feedback. Our goal is to work with the clients to get to a plan that we would be able to accept and approve in the future so that there is no surprises once they get started in construction to remediate.
Yeah, that's great. So it's not just about comments from HCAI or CDPH on your compliance. It's also the ability to get comments on a proposed solution as well, so that to your point, you can ensure that you're moving in the right area if construction is required and not take on additional costs that aren't required.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you for clarifying on that. I think that is an important part, and I would encourage anyone that begins to notice that they are not deficient to work on a proposed remediation. I think Jamie noted an early and easy option before. If you can't meet the 96 hours, see if there's options to bring more fuel on site or get arrangements in place. But before you finalize those, make sure that you submit that as a proposed remediation to that plan and let HCAI comment on it. In addition to that, if you have to do construction, I would highly encourage you to take a step to just do a little pre-planning on what that looks like. Um, Provide that with your assessment as well. And at least it tells you directionally if you're operating in the right direction before you start to spend money on engineering or construction or any additional costs as well. Last question for you, Jamie, though, before we bring on our next panelist. Based on PIN 74, again, the official announcement of the passing of Assembly Bill 2511, it currently states a facility should comply with the requirements of HSC 141822 by January 1st, 2024. If a facility requires construction to attain compliance, is that currently required complete by January 1st, 2024?
That's the way the bill's written. Yes.
And I know that previous in other states, there were waivers or extensions granted. Have you heard anything from the governor's office, or is there any proposals for it?
No, but I mean, this is a very controversial subject because obviously it takes time to do the evaluation. It takes time to come up with the design and to construct. And all I can say is really, if people start the process, they'll be they'll be in a better situation than if they don't. We're not involved in enforcement. CDPH is, but we're just trying to get the word out and trying to help people to move forward with this process to bring their facilities into code compliance.
Let's bring to the forefront Jason Balding now. Again, Jason is the primary, he works for CAF, who is the primary advocacy group for SNFs in California. I believe Jamie and Jason actually have a pretty long-standing relationship, as they've both worked on in support or in support of senior living facilities against the bill over the last few years. First and foremost, so Jamie did a great job of introducing HCAI as the regulatory body who introduced and proposed the bill into law. And it sounds like CDPH is actually the enforcement group from it. I understand you've had some conversations with CDPH recently.
Yeah, sure. And we've got some, one of our questions was, how is this going to be kind of surveyed to from an enforcement side? Because, I think Jamie really explained this. It's virtually impossible with the equipment needs, the design needs, and the review process that we have to go through in California to get projects like these approved and permitted, and then installed. There's no realistic way that any facility, had they started on the day that the legislation was passed, could meet the intent of the legislation by January 1 of 2024, provided they did not have a compliant solution already installed. And then if they do, they're great. They do the assessment. They're going to get the form that Jamie had talked about. That's fine. But the vast majority, 90% of the facilities, are going to require substantial physical plant modifications. And with that being said, we know it's virtually impossible to achieve any kind of solution by January 1. So the conversations we've had with the Department of Public Health have been, okay, here is reality. This is what the equipment takes to purchase and what the lag time is on buying that. This is what it takes to design, and this is the time it takes to go back and forth in terms of permit or plan review and approval. So you put all those things together, it's really kind of an average. And here, what we told the governor's office before he signed the bill into law was that we anticipate the average generator project is about 27 months in the state of California, and it's about X dollars. Now, that was prior to the pandemic. I think it's probably doubled in terms of both timeframes and cost. And so now we're looking at, in some instances, equipment being 50 weeks or almost a year from the time you order it to when you actually get it. And so we know you cannot physically be compliant with the law. It is impossible to do. So how do we protect ourselves as providers and say, look, we've done our due diligence. We've done what we could. We've explored all of our different options. And this is a solution that we have identified. And now that we've identified it and got approval from HCAI, it's going to take us X to do the work. And I think what CDPH has said, and their goal is not to come out and cite folks and give folks financial penalties. But I think it's each facility can expect, if you have not completed the work by January 1, and I realize this is 90% of you guys are going to get a deficiency for this, for not being compliant.
Just to clarify in your last statement there, by completing the work, you mean finishing and submitting your assessment, correct?
I'm talking about the whole thing. If you're not done with the whole thing by January 1, you're getting a citation. That's a deficiency. If you want to avoid what could potentially cost you money in terms of financial penalties, you're going to have to do your due diligence on the process you're making to become compliant. And so it starts with that assessment form. If you don't have that one in by January 1, guaranteed it's an easy deficiency. And I wouldn't even blame CDPH for that, because that is within your control. You as a facility owner or our administrator, this is within your purview, and you can get this done. And you still, in my opinion, I think you still have time to get it done by the end of this year. And so we want to encourage that. If you have not done it, you need to full court press. Everybody in your buildings needs to be working towards getting this in and getting an approval back from HCAI. That's how you start. If you don't have that foundation, it's going to be really hard to kind of talk your way out of not being cited for this. Like I said, I don't think there'll be financial penalties, but if you're egregious in your efforts to not work towards a solution, then I think it's going to be pretty easy for CDPH to cite you for that and to assign some kind of scope and severity, which could potentially cost you money, whether it's denial of payment for new admissions, whether it's a citation and a fine. I'm not certain. They haven't given us indication of what that could be. But like I said, you start with the assessment, got to have that done and in by January 1. And then if you're working towards compliance, CAF and the folks at CAF will always advocate on your behalf to make sure that the regulatory bodies understand the realities in the field and becoming compliant. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think it provides a little clarity on a few things to your point. Jamie and you both noted the bill as written said that you must be in compliance, including construction, by the end of the year, by January 1st, 2024. We all know that there's going to be real challenges. It's just not possible to physically do that for the majority of facilities out there. But what I think I heard, and I just want to bring some clarity to, is the first step, as noted, get your assessment in. That's going to alert CDPH that you're working on the process, that you're making progress against the new regulation. It may be in their best interest to include a proposed remediation if they know they're deficient. I know we typically may not like to give as much detail as possible on what we're doing, but it's going to be better to communicate against progress than not. If you don't do those things, or if you can't show progress, probably at CMS survey next year when CDPH comes out, sounds like you might be at a little bit more risk for financial penalties than if you have.
Expect there to be a focus on this when they come for next survey beginning of January 1. So.
I really appreciate that. And I just want to reinforce to that. So I've been at Direct Supply for 17 years now and been through a multitude of life safety changes at a national level and individual state things. This does feel a little bit different. It does sound like there's lower risk of financial penalty than what we were initially hearing. But my experience has been is that surveyors, CDPH, would come out, they'd have a little bit of an increased focus on your life safety code survey. And this year, you might actually be at real risk of citations if you're not in compliance already.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that. As a business owner, you should also understand that you now have a piece of legislation that basically says California wants you to focus on this, and you chose not to focus on it. And then something happened as a result of you not focusing on what California told you to focus on. You're really putting your business at risk for liability exposures. You're putting your residents and your staff at risk for negative outcomes. There are a multitude of other things besides the financial penalties on this. I get it. I don't think this is the right prioritization of spending money for protecting our residents, but it is what California has chosen, and we've got to kind of follow that to the letter of the law. And if we don't, we really, really put our business at risk if something happens and we didn't address it immediately.
That's an excellent point. And so, again, I think the thing to reiterate, at least from our perspective, documenting your progress, being able to show that documentation of your progress, and having your administrator, your executive director, your maintenance director, people that are attached both to the survey and to this new regulation familiar with your progress, sounds like the way to avoid unnecessary financial penalties or unnecessary risk to your business. The other thing I wanted to ask about, so again, I understand your specialty is emergency preparedness. While this does have an implication on the physical infrastructure of the building, this also is going to affect their emergency preparedness plans as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and for certain. And, part of the legislation as it's written gives some flexibility as to contractual agreements with fuel delivery providers. And I want to encourage folks, I know, Dustin, I gave you guys a copy of a sample template that you can use with a fuel delivery provider to sign those agreements. And this agreement is something that both us, HCAI, and CDPH, so all the regulatory bodies, along with us from the industry side, have worked on to create this template. So as long as you're using this as your basis, I think you'll be fine in terms of compliance solutions. If you're going to make changes to it, you certainly can. It's a free tool available to anybody. But if you make changes, just be aware that CDPH has, from a regulatory side, already taken a look at it and said this would pass muster for us. And so I want to encourage folks to at least utilize that if they could, and try not to change it unless you absolutely had to because the contractor didn't like the language in it. But generally, I would keep it as written if you could.
And so it looks like you provided both a template for the fuel contracts, which again, as you noted, have gone through CDPH review. And then it also looks like you have a template available for emergency preparedness plans, which it sounds like you might have already updated.
Yeah, and I think most of the providers in our state use one of two kind of plans that were developed. One that we developed in 2016, 2017, that's based on the new requirements. And then there's another company called MedPass that sells like a full template that's kind of based on ours. And so I think about 1,000 of the 1,200 providers use one of those two. So if you use our template or the MedPass template, one, obviously, you're going to have to go back in and change it. The fuel delivery contracts that we had recommended prior to this law are different than what we would recommend now. So you want to go back in. If you're using either one of those templates, remove that old MOU that you had and replace it with this new one that Dustin has here. Certainly it's available on my website if you can't download it. And then this template's available to anybody in the country. And I know a lot of other states use this as a basis for their design, but the sections which deal with fuel delivery and your business continuity plan, where you list out those fuel delivery providers, depending on what contract you get, what engineered solutions you're going to change in your building, you're also going to have possibly new folks in your business continuity plan that are going to service that new equipment. And so you want to address all of those things, make sure we have, multiple avenues of communicating with people that we're going to utilize to provide services during a disaster. So all those things have to kind of be factored in and built back into your plan that didn't exist before. And so hopefully you guys can figure out where to do that. But if you use the CAF template, we're a free resource. I'm happy to answer questions from anybody, CAF member, not a CAF member, it doesn't matter. To me, we work under a grant with the state of California. So if anybody has any questions about how do we address our EOP or what is best practice, by all means, email me or call me anytime.
Jamie's actually going to take us through in a few minutes a live assessment. And so to Jason's point, one of the most important things we need to do as a SNF provider in the state of California is get that assessment in before January 1st. And in order to avoid any unnecessary fines or an unnecessary scrutiny from CDPH as they come out and they perform surveys. So before we switch gears though, let's bring Jamie back for a quick moment. I know that within the user guide that you created or that HCAI created, Jamie, there's a really nice flow diagram on the review and approval process. And let's bring that to the screen now. Can you just walk us through really briefly the process towards compliance? So we talked about it a few minutes ago, but in your words, using this diagram, can just take us through what that review process looks like.
Sure. This is set up would work for any facility in any condition. So essentially, if we start at the top, we have the start oval, and that goes, basically prepare compliance documents. Then the client would submit the assessment application. It would come to HCAI down on the third line here. We'd begin review, and we would either remark or we would identify it as compliant. So we'll come through the pathway that says, okay, you're a facility that has everything in place, and we'll take the review. There'll be no remarks. It'll come over here to the compliant diamond, and the compliant diamond, if it's we're assuming here it's compliant. It would then go over to CDPH. CDPH would review it, and upon their concurrence, if they have any comments, they would send that back to the client. If not, CDPH would review it, they would concur, and a compliant letter would be sent. Now, I'll go ahead and go on the other extreme, which is probably where we're going to see a lot of our facilities falling. So again, we'll start at the top at the oval where we start. The client prepares the documents, submits the documents, HCAI begins to review, and we determine that the facility is not compliant. So once it's not compliant, then a non-compliance letter would be sent. And in this case, the letter would identify the areas of non-compliance. The letter would, if a proposed solution is submitted, the letter would comment on that proposed solution. And then once that's done, the client can use that to obtain professional services and begin a construction project. If that's what's required. Once the construction project takes place, for instance, more resources are built on site to provide the alternate power source for cooling, life-saving equipment, oxygen generating device, then that project would be completed, closed out, and at that point, the client would start another facility assessment. All three of these, the original assessment, the project, will be linked, but they'll be separate submittals to OSHPD. So then the new assessment would be submitted. And in this case, hopefully everything has been addressed. It would come to HCAI down here on the third line again. We'd do our review. We'd assume no remarks because this is the second time the client's gone through it. We'd come to the compliant diamond. We'd see yes, it's compliant. It would come to CDPH. CDPH would review. Upon concurrence from CDPH, the compliant letter would be sent to the owner and the assessment would be completed. So the point being is that for a number of facilities, there are going to be two assessments. One is going to be original just to identify where the areas of noncompliance and propose a remediation. And then once that project, and it could be as simple as obtaining a contract for the fuel service, fuel delivery to meet the 96 hours. Once that's complete, then a new assessment would need to be filled out, submitted, and then once that's determined to be compliant, the letter would be sent out to show the facility's in compliance and the process would be complete.
So I think I'm hearing you right, and I'm pretty excited to get over and start one of these assessments myself. But if you're in compliance today with your existing situation, you have the one-time assessment you fill out. If
Correct.
you're in compliance with your coverage, but you can't meet your fuel the 96 hours, you submit the assessment once, you get your fuel contract, and then you resubmit a second assessment, and then it'll be judged. And if it's in compliance, then you're complete as well.
Yes, and I would encourage that if you're that close, I would go ahead and work on getting your fuel,
Submitted up front.
agreement, and then go ahead and submit that all up front, so you can
Got
get
it.
right stream right through the process.
So that
Really,
that does feel like
yeah,
it does feel like the one reason why you might delay. If you begin your assessment and you determine that you're going to be in compliance for coverage, as you're saying, get your fuel contract in place, submit it with it, and then there's just the one-time judgment, the one-time assessment if proved compliant.
exactly. And we've seen some of those come in, and we'll reach back out to the client and say, hey, you're really close. Do you want to just consider getting the fuel agreement in, and we can sign this thing off? But it's up to the client how they want to do that. This kind of tried to take care of all occurrences, and really wanted to give the map of a facility that has to do construction project to bring resources on, and it shows how there's an initial assessment, the construction, and then a final assessment.
Perfect. Let's not delay any further. And while I drive on my computer over here, let's bring Brody Coates on. And I know he's actually got some questions again against the free 30-minute consultations we've been offering at TELS. We've heard from hundreds of customers some common concerns. So as we walk through the assessment, I'd like him to have the opportunity to ask you a little bit about that as well. So I'm going to your primary website, is that right?
Yes, hci.ca.gov, and then go
Perfect.
ahead and pick on the building safety, and we'll go ahead down to the e-services portal.
All right.
Jimmy, as this is coming up, one of the things that we've heard is that HCAI recommends working with a licensed professional on assessments. Can you provide examples, why and how this will kind of aid and improve the assessment process?
Well, Brody, just to be clear, we've set this assessment to be so that anybody could fill it out. The facilities people can do that on their own. Obviously, if they find that they have deficiencies, a licensed professional would need to be brought on board. And so, it could speed up the process to have that licensed professional involved from the start. But I just want to be clear. We did make this as simple as possible, and we do work with the clients to help them get it in, and to reach a status of either non-compliant or compliance.
All right, thanks.
All righty. So we see the SNF assessment button down below. I'd go ahead and pick that.
So here I just enter in my facility information. All right, so that's us. We're in Sacramento, skilled nursing facility, 1234 facility address. That's us. This all looks good. Selecting my contact. Perfect, that's me. Now we continue the application. Is that where we click next?
Yes.
So as Brody was just asking, it looks like this is the place we could enter if we were working with a licensed professional.
Correct.
Since I'm not, I'll just click through that. And here we are.
So now we're going to there'll be a number of questions, and we do kind of include that a checklist for you to bring information, but I want to point out you can start this and stop this and get back into this assessment where you left off. So we'll go ahead and start at the top. Heating equipment. The first question is, do you have heating systems currently at the facility? And I'll go ahead and just put in answers for what we see most frequently on the assessments that are turned into us up to now. I'll just say, as of today, we're at about 150 assessments that have been submitted. So go ahead and click yes for the first one on the heating. Does it maintain the temperatures? We're going to assume yes, that you do have equipment that maintains comfort. And so then we would say, have you submitted a plan? So we're looking for a plan that shows the heating equipment and the areas of coverage. And this doesn't need to be anything special. It could be, we've seen people use just their exiting plans and overlaying patterns on top of that to identify which equipment serves which area. So let's go ahead and pick yes, that you've got that and you submitted that. Then the next question, is it on emergency power? Now, as the code was in existence before this new requirement, yes, everybody's heating was required to be on emergency power. Let's assume that's the case. Is it connected to an alternate? Now, this is where it might get a little mixed up. Emergency power is your emergency generator. Alternate power, typically we wouldn't see that on the site initially. It could turn out that your solution is alternate power, in which case when you come through with your assessment the second time, you would check that. So let's check no for alternate power at this point. Will the heating equipment work in the event of a power outage? Let's say yes. We're assuming that it is backed up by the emergency generator. And then we're going to go ahead and look at cooling equipment. So we'll see the same kind of questions. So on this one, we'll say, just to go quickly, yes, we have cooling equipment. Yes, it maintains comfort for number 8. yes, we've included a floor plan. Typically, it's the same floor plan, the equipment, HVAC equipment that does heating and cooling for the same areas. And then number 10, typically we would see this answered as no. This was not a code requirement before this bill was passed. And so in most cases, our facilities don't have that. And so is it connected to alternate power? We would say yes. I'm sorry, no on that one, because right now we're looking at just an initial assessment, which is typically that wouldn't be the case. Will it work in the event of a power outage? No. Okay. Now, we're going to start moving into life-saving equipment. And I'll just go real quick and we'll take the simple way out. Let's just say no for ventilators. You'll see if you check no for ventilators, that will take care of the next two, which identify are they on emergency power. AEDs, we could go ahead and say yes on that. We do see those frequently in our facilities. And then are they connected to emergency power? So typically these are can be plugged into red plugs. So let's say yes. And let's say yes, they'll work on a utility outage. Let's go ahead and say no for crash carts. No for other equipment. And then we'll be moving down to oxygen generating. So typically we do see facilities have oxygen concentrators. So let's say yes. Are the concentrators connected to emergency power? We'll say yes. Typically they have red plugs at the patient beds, which are used for that. Will they work in the event of a power outage? Yes. And then let's go ahead for positive pressure apparatus, just say no. Again, you're filling this out accurately for your facility. I'm just doing this for a random facility and just selecting what we commonly see. Typically we say no on the large scale oxygen generating systems. Now we're going to look at the generators. And the generators, does your facility currently have a permanent on-site generator? Generally the case is yes. That's would mean it's a code compliant facility prior to this new bill. Does it have 96 hours? I would say no. So typically we see that facilities, it's interesting, most of the surveys that we see identify that the generators have anywhere from 10 to 70 hours, just based on what the existing conditions are. But we haven't seen any come through yet that already have 96 hours of on-site fuel storage. Does it have 6 hours? Typically we see yes. That was the original requirement, the previous requirement for SNFs. Does the facility currently, okay, existing alternate power source? Typically we don't see, I'm sorry, let's look at 20C. Emergency generators, does the facility have a fuel delivery agreement to supply? We do see that a lot of people do have fuel service agreements, so we can go ahead and check that. Yes. In that case, you're just able to forward what you already have in place for us to evaluate if that's going to be adequate. Alternate power source, typically no. And then existing system, a single line. So let's say yes, that you will be able to turn in a single line on number 22. So now what you'll see is that the form is self-populated, and it basically says, based on your responses, this is the additional information that you need to submit. So number one, a floor plan showing the heating units. Number two, include the assertion that you do meet the cooling heating requirements. That would be typical for 1 through 7, 8, basically, and 9. It is just showing a floor plan that identifies your heating and cooling equipment and what areas it serves. If we look at 12, which is really important, is provide a single line diagram. It doesn't have to be anything special. This might be where you might need to get a professional to help you put that together. But if you have something existing, you can certainly submit that. Include the and then on number 17, show where the concentrators are. Again, this can be simply as a floor plan with some dots and showing receptacles that would be the emergency power source. 20C, essentially is an assertion of whether we meet the pin or not. And then that kind of wraps it. I do want to, so what will happen is that this will be a form that will be submitted to HCAI, and then we'll evaluate it based on the answers given. And typically, in this case, we'd say, yes, we agree with you that the facility is out of compliance. Here are the areas of non-compliance. Number one, you don't have cooling on emergency power. Number two, you don't have 96 hours of fuel. So that would be kind of typically what we would say. And then if you submit a BOD level of remediation plan, then we would comment on the adequacy of that.
So with those questions there, Jamie, um, how much detail, if they do have to fill that out, regarding the equipment that they would have to put in as far as make, model, serial number, and access that information, whether they have it in like a TELS platform, or is it something that they just need to go around and get all the data plates, and how much information will be required on that?
For the existing equipment, we don't require much detail. What is it? Where is it located? For the HVAC equipment, what does it serve? For the generator, what size generator? We do ask you to call out the manufacturer, the kilowatts, the capacity of the generator, and then we also ask you to fill in the amount of fuel storage that you have on site and how long that would operate the generator for.
Okay. And then in regards to one of the things that I've heard a lot of is just as far as plans and layouts, and I know you touched upon this, but as far as just like equipment layout, you said they don't need an actual HVAC plan. It could be possibly something like an egress plan that's been marked up that shows what areas those units serve. Um, and the other one that we've seen a lot of is just the one lines. But it sounded like you had stated that this is something that if you don't have it, it's not there. You just can't sketch it on a napkin, but you'll probably have to engage a professional to put those together. Is that correct?
Yeah, you want to have an accurate single line diagram. That's kind of, the meat of this challenge is how are we going to modify the existing electrical distribution system to meet these new requirements, both on an alternate source and on feeding the HVAC equipment.
Okay. In regards to that HVAC equipment, other things we've heard is the big change here has been maintaining those safe temperatures for the 96 hours. And there's obviously areas in California that may not have HVAC systems, that they would have to to maintain those temperatures. But if they don't have HVAC systems in, are they going to be required to put that in, or how is that going to be determined, whether or not?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking that. You know, inherent built into this form is the ability for the client to declare, hey, I'm in a temperate climate zone. I don't require artificial cooling to maintain these temperatures. And that can be asserted and that can be submitted. That's what HCAI will look at. I'm an electrical engineer, but we have mechanical engineers that'll take a look at the weather data for that area, the temperatures, and either validate or determine that that's not acceptable. So those type of things, there's other things that we see where people would like to limit the amount of resources to backup, and they might propose, hey, I'm going to just put one large air conditioning unit on emergency power that feeds the dining area, in which case that will be evaluated by our staff. There are requirements for square footage per occupant that's required, but we really put this assessment in for you, the client, to take a look at those things and find out, is there ways that you can minimize the impact of this to your facility? Where I think hopefully we're all on the same page. This is an important requirement. and it's meaningful. It's intended to really provide safe environment for people that can't take care of themselves. So it's going to be legitimately scrutinized and evaluated. But if you feel that you have a special circumstance, go ahead and put that in the assessment process. And if you feel like you need to add a note, similar to the BOD level, you can add a letter that says, here's what we have experienced and here's how we're addressing it. So, really good question. That's exactly what this is intended to shake out, those type of things. The last thing we want is for someone to make the assumption that they're going to be okay with not providing cooling and not getting our buy off on that, and then going ahead and doing a project that doesn't bring the facility within compliance. So.
Well, I might be a little bit nerdy, but I do have to admit that was kind of fun to walk through. So Jamie, thank you for taking me through your site. John, when a building determines that they need to enhance or to augment the alternative power source in order to be in compliance, so they filled the form out, the form's telling them they have things to do. What are some of the things you should be considering? Our audience today as administrators or executive directors, they may not always be maintenance themselves. What should they consider that might help them guide themselves through the process?
Well, a couple of quick things, and thank you again for having me on board. I think the assessment is going to help set some goals for you, and it's understanding, what are the goals that you need to have once you find out where you're deficient, and then what is the plan to be able to reach those goals. Um, Everyone needs to understand, you probably have a generator at your SNF today, but that generator has to meet certain codes, and the loads that are on there are not the loads that we've been talking about, right? They're the emergency lights. They're the critical facility loads. They're different things that are called out by the National Electric Code as well as by California codes as things that have to be on the generator. And now we're talking about adding or changing to that, right? We're augmenting and putting additional things on there. We're talking about adding the air conditioning system, making priorities for the oxygen systems, and then the discussion we've had about fuel and how we're going to address having 96 hours of fuel. So a couple of things for people to think about. The first is, how big of a generator do you have? Um, is that a generator that is sufficient to carry this additional load? Right? So identifying the model, how much kW that generator is, that's the rating of the generator, and figuring out how much headspace you have. Maybe doing a survey of the facility to know how much load is actually on the generator today. It gives you an idea of how much room you have. Second is, I know this sounds a little oddball, but do you have a centralized air conditioning system? Or are you talking about individual air conditioners, I think called PTAC units, that are going to be in each individual room? That's something you're going to have to look at. Lastly, the big thing is to look at, where is the power coming from? Do you have like one central air conditioning, or do you have one central electrical distribution, or do you have an east wing, a west wing, a north wing, and a south wing panels that feed everything? Because that's going to impact your site.
Appreciate that. And so thinking a little bit about construction projects, I think we've heard a little bit about today, and I think we're going to hear in a few minutes a little bit more from Jamie about some proposed options that HCAI has put out. But one of the things we've heard a lot from our customers is, do I need to add a second generator, or can I augment or improve the existing generator? What would these answers do to help point a building in one direction or another?
Well, I mean, and that's kind of where these questions come from, right? So the first thing is, what do I own? What kind of space do I have in there? And ideally, this is the ideal thing, right? Is you put the oxygen on those red plugs, and you have a centralized air conditioning system that you can wire into that generator, and life is pretty good. Then the big thing you'd have to tackle is, you'd have to tackle the 96 hours of fuel, make arrangements for all of that. That's the ideal situation for somebody today. The second is, though, all right, you don't have enough space on this generator, and you need to deal with the air conditioning system, and you have a centralized air conditioning system. So maybe you need to bring in an additional resource that is going to be powering that central air conditioning system. Okay. And that may be an additional generator or whatever other alternate source you're looking for, that's going to just directly be hooked to that air conditioning system to do the backup for that air conditioning system.
Perfect. So
The
don't
challenge,
go ahead,
I
John.
do want to, okay. The last thing is, though, I mentioned the PTAC units and all of that. That becomes the big challenge, is now you need to start thinking about, do I want to rewire my entire building, or do I want to think about just bringing one generator that's going to be able to back up the entire building, right? And that's a conversation that you need to have with folks like Brody and have an evaluation for how much is a capital good, how much does it cost to get a little bit bigger generator to cover the whole building versus how much would it cost to have somebody in your building for a wire rewiring your building to be able to manage everything from there. So that's why I bring that up, is how your building is wired is going to have an impact on how this whole solution comes through.
Yeah, that's a great place to bring Brody back in, because what I'm hearing is scope going bigger and bigger and bigger potentially when you talk about the needs of the individual resident rooms with the P-tax versus a centralized unit. So don't go away just yet. But Brody, as we're discussing solutions around the new guidelines, what else should a building consider if they're thinking about, that scope and the size of the project they're looking at?
Yeah, so obviously you're building. The first thing is you want to make compliant with everything that needs to be back up and spelled out by HCAI to bring you up to that compliance level. But other things you have to think about is while you have residents in that facility, they're not going anywhere. There's other things that also need to be thought about. Laundry services, food, and everything, and how can you keep that building running and maintaining while they're in there with those safe temperatures, but also remain operational at the same time. So it's something you're going to want to consider as well. And with this type of project and the amount of capital you're going to invest, you're also going to want to take into consider those factors as well, instead of possibly having to send your laundry out, bringing food services in. So just things you want to think about as you go through the entire process and you're taking on a project like this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. As we were talking with Jason earlier today, it's not just about the physical infrastructure, it's about that emergency preparedness plan. So I think you're spot on. It's not just about the vital care solutions. If you're thinking about a scope that includes adding a generator or augmenting or enhancing, you probably want to consider those additional services, and if you want them to be loaded or added as well. The other thing I hear about commonly too, when we're getting into that place, is thinking about things like entertainment beyond care, right? Because expectations of residents isn't just for the clinical or healthcare that they receive, but Wi-Fi, electronics, things like that as well.
Correct.
So with cost being a large factor for many of our buildings, it's not that skilled nursing has the availability of funding. What are some things to consider in making financially wise decisions when you're considering scope and considering change in order to maintain compliance?
So a lot of it comes down to your budget, where you want to fall, and it's been mentioned by other people on this webinar, is looking at if you need to go with a more financially sound or smaller budget. You can try to keep your existing equipment if you have it. If you have an emergency generator that's already on site, how can you utilize that and keep that operational, and then bringing in some kind of alternate power source to then back up just those loads. Um, but then it comes down to, again, what we just discussed, as far as if you want to remain operational, what's your cost impact of having alternate food sources, laundry, and everything like that, and is it a better solution to look at backing up your building and making sure that design stays compliant from emergency standpoints, and then this legislation as well.
So three things I think I've heard from you on some of these calls, these consultations as well: cost, location or space, and then time frames, right? All these are constraints that we're going to see. And I think Jason noted it before. We were seeing, or he was seeing, an average of 27 months, and now we're seeing lead times up to 50 months or more. Can you speak a little bit about those considerations alongside cost for a project of this size or scope?
Yeah, so duration, like Jason said prior, is big. Lead times on equipment, we're seeing, in the neighborhood of 50 weeks for, say, generator equipment or generators at this point. Um, and then the other piece that really comes into it is distribution. If there's any kind of distribution or anything that needs to be added to this, some of those lead times currently are longer than what your generator lead time will be. But definitely, John can speak more to what he's seeing as far as lead times from generators. But there's a lot of other equipment that comes into play that currently does not have low lead times.
Yeah, John, let's kick over to you for a second. So both want to touch on both the space considerations, but also what Brody was just talking about, lead times. From a manufacturing perspective, I know Generac has really brought a lot of manufacturing in-house, parts, equipment, everything. Where are you guys at lead times, and what do you see as a standard in the industry today?
I think it's fair to say that lead times can be a little bit of a moving target. But what I can tell you is that frankly, things got a little ugly a couple of years ago. Supply constraints hit the entire industry, right? Doesn't matter. Generators, switches, panel boards, everything. We've seen things get better, and certainly things in what I'm going to call the medium-sized generators down to the smaller generators, those have gotten a lot better, right? So we're talking about lead times in the neighborhood of half a year or so or less to be able to get some of those generator products. But as Brody mentioned, we still have to talk about electrical distribution panels, still got to talk about transfer switches, and some of those things. I can control what I can control from our perspective as a manufacturer. Um, smaller generators are getting better. Transfer switches are getting better, but we do also need to talk to the folks who make distribution panels. If we need to rewire a building, that becomes kind of a thing. Um, the other thing is in its footprint. Footprint, where are you going to put this? If you do need to add an additional generator to go right next to the one you've got, are we eating up a parking space? So you need to look at your permit and understand how many parking spaces am I allocated for from my local municipality as to how many spaces am I allowed to have, or how many spaces do I have to have? Because in a number of cases, based on my previous experience in Florida, yeah, we ate up some parking spaces with generators because that was the only place to put it. So trying to figure out, where are you going to put this piece of equipment if you need to add equipment to the facility?
We've talked a lot about the code change in California, but I have to assume that's not the only thing that people have to consider, right? There's local municipal approval, and then there's still other national codes that come into play, whether you're augmenting or improving on existing or you're adding new. So, John, let's go back to you. What are some additional codes or considerations that people need to have as they're thinking about replacing or enhancing?
Well, there are many standards you have to deal with, but things we deal with National Electric Code, right? That's something we have to deal with. That's some requirements, and you can't get away from those. There is a standard called the National Fire Prevention Association, or NFPA 110, that's about generator equipment. NFPA 37, that's about installation of generator equipment. But you also need to pay attention to local California stuff, right? In California, you have air quality management districts, or AQMDs. So any generator that you're putting in has to meet the local air board requirements, as well as, because this product is there to enhance life safety for a facility, you have seismic concerns. And California requires that products that are going to be used for life safety applications have been, actually, what we have to do is we have to take them to a shake table. We have to take a prototype piece of equipment to a shake table and make sure that it's still going to survive a seismic activity. So it can't be just some generator that comes off of the shelf. There are specific things that we need to do from an air quality standpoint, as well as from a seismic standpoint, to make sure it meets California requirements.
Yeah, other factors that really kind of come into play too is, along with having your survey done by HCAI, if this needs to go into fulfillment and installation, you do run into other constraints as far as permitting. You still have to go through your local AHJ, get everything approved. And to John's point, there's, factors that may come in that are just above electrical permitting and requirements and review from those local AHJs, whether you're taking up parking lots and you need to have those studies done. There's other things that we've seen as far as seismic studies just for the pad that the equipment would sit on, and they want to know that report has been completed and is sufficient, which is outside of what a manufacturer may do for just their equipment purposes of it. So all those things need to be taken into consideration above and beyond just the equipment lead time, but other reviews that'll have to be done even outside of HCAI for permitting purposes.
I do have to say, I think I'm hearing a lot of best practice for you, and it does tie back to what Jason and Jamie said at the onset. Let's get those assessments in. Let's see what the assessments say about our existing conditions, and let's start the work, because it sounds like there's a potential for a lot of change. Last thing before I bring Jamie back, though, just want to ask you. So, John, I know you noted you actually worked on some of the opportunity or some of the regulatory change in Florida. I'll ask the same to you in a second, Brody. Any best practices you'd share with senior living facilities as they go to address this regulatory change?
Best practices, the biggest thing is get someone who's done this before. Make sure that you have someone that knows all the different regulations. And I just want to reiterate what Jamie's been saying. Get them in there. Let's get the assessment done, and let's get things moving, right? Let's get your paperwork in, because what you really don't want to do is you don't want to have yourself behind the eight ball through all of this. Every facility is different. You'd like to think that there's some level of cookie cutterness, but every facility is different because you don't know where the parking lot is, where the lot line is, all of that different stuff, different air quality districts. So I'd love to go for some other best practices, but really, let's get the assessment in, and then we can start talking about what is the solution that you're going to be able to put in once we understand what those deficiencies are.
Yeah, I echo what John said. Obviously, the assessment is the big thing to get in, and that's going to be your biggest starting point to make sure that you know what size project you're going to do if a project is needed. And obviously, all this is it's going to be time, and make sure that you know what is going to be needed. Make sure the people that you're working with may have everything in your interest covered as far as making sure from a compliance standpoint, from HCAI and then a permitting and everything like that, that everything will be covered so that you don't have any issues when it comes to either inspections or final installs.
Perfect. Really appreciate it, guys, and thank you for joining in with the rest of it. Stay close. We might have a question that have come in during the registration, so just hang tight for a minute. Any last thing to add, Jamie or Jason?
I just want to encourage folks, don't hesitate to reach out to the free resources that are available to you to help you get through this challenging time.
And I think one last question for Brody and for John. It's based off a couple things that have come in. So if I need to begin to work towards compliance, my assessment shows I'm deficient. I think we've hit on some of the documentations today, but what are some additional things that you'd like to see as customers or individuals start to have conversations about a path to compliance? Brody, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the first thing, with the assessment, as you start, is make sure you have all your documentation needed. Get all that stuff together. Make sure you have plans, and if not, prepare to whatever you can, or engage a professional to put that stuff together. Is the big thing to making sure you move forward. And then if there are requirements that you need to do some kind of construction, you're going to need building plans, your utility bills with your peak demands and everything. So the more you can be prepared and get that stuff ahead of time and be proactive will help you out.
Thanks, Brody. John, any final thoughts?
Brody brought up a bunch of good ones there. In doing these projects, I think the biggest thing is patience. This is not going to happen overnight. And I know a lot of people start to get pretty anxious about doing these types of things. We as manufacturers will produce product as soon as we can. But these projects don't happen that quickly. I think we've all recognized that they called to have this done by the beginning of next year, and that's just not realistic. We all get that. We're going to work through schedules, and we're going to produce products and be able to put things in place as schedules allow. So just understand it's going to take a little while, and everyone understands that. The state understands that. And so recognizing some patience, making sure you're communicating your wants and desires as we go along, and any goals that you have to both yourself as well as obviously your residents and the other people that you work with, so that we can get this. We all want to leave these projects feeling good about what we've done, right? And going in with a good spirit and good open mind, and just recognize it's going to take a little while. It's going to make everybody feel pretty good at the end of the project.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's an excellent sentiment, I think, to end on, because I don't think, as Jason noted in the earlier parts, anybody was looking forward for regulatory change. But at the same time, now that it exists, we need to work towards compliance. And as John just noted right now, compliance isn't going to come overnight. So let's take the steps. Let's figure out what the assessment's in, make sure we get our feedback from HCAI, from CDPH, and then start to document our progress towards compliance, engaging with and utilizing experts like folks on the call or service providers locally. Make sure that they're aware of the regulation and other competing regulations or certifications as well. As we discussed today, it's a great way to weed out who you work with and who you're talking to. But regardless, the important part is to get your assessment in, to start make progress, and to continue to work towards compliance over time. Really appreciate everybody joining. Really appreciate the spirit of this audience and this group today. We'll now be turning over to the product portion of the webinar. There are great tools that are available for you to use. Noting first, again, HCAI's assessment guide that they've provided. In addition to that, roughly half of our viewers today, half of the SNFs in California, are TELS subscribers, which means you've got free access to a checklist that can help you gather the documentation and information required to fill out the assessment, all through your TELS platform. In addition to that, as you complete that checklist, it's going to store your documentation and your results for you. So all the information you gather before you submit to the assessment will be stored in TELS. Then when you complete your assessment, you can take that PDF and the letter that you receive, load that into TELS as well in preparation for your CDPH CMS survey in 2024. Lastly, if you do need support gathering information, completing an assessment, or beginning on engineering or any other things, look to TELS as well. We have nationwide engineering specialized towards generators and specifically this event in California. We're more than happy to assist you and to quote competitively as well. Lastly, building off of that, again, you can trust us for the entirety of the process for certification for compliance. We will be with you from day one, whether that's information gathering, whether that's through TELS platform, through our licensed professionals and our service provider network, or engineering, procurement, and installation on to preventative maintenance. Direct Supply is a one-stop shop in that regard, and we'd be happy to help you, found on the website below. Lastly, I do want to note, again, Direct Supply and Generac have entered into a strategic partner, not just to support the needs of California SNFs as they go through this compliance event, but in general. And the reason is pretty simple. We found that by partnering together, we can bring customers to a quicker decision as to what their needs are through our engineering services, leverage the faster lead times and control over manufacturing that Generac has in procurement, and get you a generator and transfer switches and all necessary equipment on site and installed, hopefully faster at a lower cost than our competitors. But regardless of that, you're also going to receive the expertise brought by two groups that have worked on nationwide events and state regulations like this in the past. So please don't hesitate. Call our 888 number below to start finding out more, or visit our website as seen on the last slide. And the last thing I just want to note, and this is a great place to end, don't forget to document your progress and be able to communicate against your results. As many of us have noted today, this is going to be a long event that spans multiple years. Make sure your assessment is in before 1/1/24, and as you start to receive survey, you may not be able to avoid citations, as Jason noted, but you can certainly work to avoid financial penalties or other impacts by being able to communicate on your progress and continue to work towards compliance. Leverage TELS, leverage your resources to do that. Overall, we really appreciate the time that you spent with us today and the opportunity that you've took to learn more. We'd love to help you in any way possible as you start to work towards compliance. So please, please, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you to our presenters for all the expertise they brought. Thank you to you, and thanks for everything that you do for your residents every day of their lives. Appreciate you. Have a great day.